When federal agents smashed through the security gate of Sean Combs' Miami mansion with an armored vehicle, the world still had no idea what was inside. What they found over the next several hours would eventually make its way into a federal indictment, a 7-week criminal trial, and a courtroom where jurors put on headphones and watched footage that nobody outside those walls was permitted to see. Behind the image of one of music's most powerful men was something investigators described as a criminal enterprise running for decades, hidden in plain sight. On March 25, 2024, 80 to 90 agents from the Department of Homeland Security descended simultaneously on 2 of Sean Combs' properties, one in Miami Beach and one in Beverly Hills. The raids were coordinated. An armored vehicle drove directly into the Miami estate's security gate. Agents handcuffed and searched roughly a half-dozen of Combs' employees. Boats patrolled the water around the Star Island property to prevent escape by sea. Combs himself was not home. He was reportedly at the Miami Opa-locka Executive Airport, preparing for a spring break trip to the Bahamas with his children. A separate private jet was traveling from California to Antigua that morning, which immediately sparked rumors that he was attempting to flee the country. He was not on that flight, and the trip appears to have proceeded as planned. But the scale of what agents found inside both properties would define everything that followed. What investigators found inside both homes was extensive and specific. The federal indictment later filed against Combs described the contents in detail. Agents seized electronic devices that contained images and videos of what Combs referred to as freak-offs, recorded events involving multiple victims. They found narcotics. They found firearms, including 3 AR-15-style rifles, with defaced serial numbers and a large-capacity drum magazine. And they found something that would become one of the most widely circulated details of the entire case: more than 1,000 bottles of baby oil and personal lubricant. These were not scattered randomly across the properties. According to testimony and the indictment, these supplies were stocked deliberately and methodically to be prepared in advance for the events that prosecutors alleged Combs arranged at hotel rooms across the country. The indictment described staff being responsible for ensuring rooms were equipped with specific materials before each event. The events at the center of the investigation were called freak-offs. According to the federal indictment, they were elaborate and produced sex performances that Combs arranged, directed, and often electronically recorded. They could last for days. When participants were physically exhausted, Combs would arrange for intravenous fluids to be administered so that the events could continue. Prosecutors alleged that he used a combination of narcotics, including ketamine, MDMA, and GHB, to keep participants compliant. Women were allegedly flown in specifically for these events, their travel arranged and paid for through corporate accounts tied to Combs' business entities, including Bad Boy Entertainment worldwide. The indictment argued that by routing these payments through his companies, Combs had deliberately entangled his personal crimes with his professional organization. The freak-offs were not spontaneous. They were planned, funded, and managed like a business operation. The most significant witness the government called was Cassie Ventura, the singer who had been in a relationship with Combs for more than a decade. She testified for multiple days, describing in precise detail what she experienced during that time. She told the court that the freak-offs had begun to feel inescapable. Combs had allegedly kept recordings of her participation in them, and she testified that she feared what would happen to her career and her family if those recordings ever became public. She described taking MDMA before the events to dull her awareness of what was happening and using ketamine and GHB during them for their dissociative effects. She was simultaneously managing an opioid addiction, she testified, taking depressants afterward to come down from the stimulants she had consumed. She described being beaten on multiple occasions, and prosecutors showed the jury photographs of her injuries, including black eyes, swollen eyebrows, and bruising across her body. Combs did not deny striking and kicking her. His defense argued the relationship was consensual and complicated, describing it as a toxic dynamic between two people rather than a pattern of criminal coercion. One piece of evidence needed no interpretation. In 2016, a security camera at the Intercontinental Hotel in Manhattan captured Combs approaching Ventura in a hallway, throwing her to the ground, kicking her, and dragging her back toward their room. The footage was obtained by CNN and made public in 2024. before the trial began. It was shown to the jury during the proceedings. After the footage became public, Combs posted a video apology online, calling his behavior inexcusable and saying he had sought professional help. He had also, according to prosecutors, attempted to bribe the hotel's security staff to keep the tape from surfacing. That attempted bribery became part of the indictment. Prosecutors argued that the recordings Combs made during the freak-offs were not simply personal archives, they were leverage. The indictment described them as embarrassing, incriminating material that he kept specifically to ensure the continued obedience and silence of the victims. Cassie Ventura testified to this directly. She told the jury that she had asked Combs to delete certain recordings and believed he had done so, only to discover later, on a flight back from the Cannes Film Festival, that he still had the footage on his laptop. She said she felt trapped. Prosecutors argued the recordings gave Combs ongoing control over women whose participation he needed to maintain and whose silence he could not afford to lose. The defense pushed back, arguing the videos showed women participating willingly and that their presence in the footage cut against the government's theory of coercion. That dispute about consent and control became the defining tension of the 7-week trial. Beyond the physical evidence from the raids, prosecutors built a picture of what they called the Combs Enterprise, a criminal organization they alleged operated within his network of businesses and personal staff. The indictment named members of his security team, personal assistants, household employees, and senior supervisors as participants in or enablers of the criminal conduct. His chief of staff, Christina Coram, was referenced repeatedly in evidence and testimony, portrayed by prosecutors as a central figure in the logistics of the enterprise. She was not charged, but was not called as a witness by the defense. Employees were alleged to have bought drugs on Combs' behalf, arranged travel for victims, cleaned hotel rooms after freak-offs to limit forensic evidence, and coordinated payments in ways designed to obscure what the money was being spent on. Rapakid Kudi testified during the trial. Over the course of 7 weeks, the government called 34 witnesses. The verdict and what followed, the jury deliberated for 3 days. On July 2, 2025, they returned a split verdict. Combs was acquitted of racketeering conspiracy and both counts of sex trafficking, the most serious charges he faced. He was convicted on 2 counts of transportation to engage in prostitution, one involving Cassie Ventura and one involving a woman who testified under the pseudonym Jane. The acquittals meant he avoided 15-year mandatory minimum sentences for each sex trafficking count, as well as the possibility of life in prison on the racketeering charge. His legal team called it a significant result. Ventura's attorney called it a disappointment that Combs had not been convicted on the more serious counts, but said he had been held accountable. Outside the courthouse, some members of the public celebrated by spraying baby oil into the crowd. Judge Aaron Subramanian denied bail after the verdict, telling defense attorneys that they had themselves admitted during closing arguments that violence had taken place. He sentenced Combs on October 3, 2025, to 4 years and 2 months in prison, a $500,000 fine, and 5 years of supervised release. Prosecutors had sought more than 11 years. The defense had argued for 14 months. Before the sentence was read, Combs addressed the court, apologizing for what he called his sick actions and asking for mercy. As he was led out, he turned toward his family, pressed his hand to his heart, and said he loved them. He told them he would be okay. Several of his children were in tears. What the case ultimately revealed was not simply the conduct of one man, but the infrastructure that allowed that conduct to persist for more than 2 decades. Dozens of people worked around him. Hotels were booked, flights were arranged, rooms were cleaned, payments were routed through corporate accounts, recordings were kept, and none of it surfaced publicly until a lawsuit was filed in late 2023, and a security camera video changed the conversation in 2024. The question that lingered after the verdict was not only about guilt on specific charges, it was about how much of what was described in testimony was known to the wider industry around Combs, and why nothing had been said sooner. Cassie Ventura, in a letter to the judge before sentencing, described her testimony as the most traumatic and horrifying chapter of her life. She said she hoped the process would allow her to move forward. The judge called her and the other women who testified brave survivors and said their children would one day be proud of them for coming to court to tell the truth. Whether the legal outcome matched the scale of what was described inside that courtroom is a question that the people who experienced it will be living with long after the sentence is served.